Hey darlings, welcome back to my channel. Thank you very much for being here. If you are new to my channel, please kindly click the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell so that you don't miss any of my videos. So in today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you guys how to make this simple yet elegant off-shoulder dress. It's very fun to make and easy to make as well. And as you can see, the sleeve has a rubber band to it, so you can always adjust it onto your shoulder if you don't like off-shoulder dress. So if you want to find out how to make this dress, make sure you watch till the end. So now I'm going to start off with cutting out the front piece, and I'm going to cut the upper part now. I'm cutting on fold. Now to determine the amount of fabric to fold, I measured the bust circumference, which is 38 inches, divided by 4, 9.5 inch. Then 1 inch for the zip allowance in front, that makes it 10.5 inches, plus 3 inches for seam allowance, and that is 13.5 inch. Now to determine the length of the upper part of the dress, I first of all marked out ½ inch and placed 4 inches there for the off shoulder. You can take yours up to 5 inches depending on how low you want the neckline to be. And from there I measured out 16 inches, which is the length of the upper part of the dress. And you can take yours up to 16.5 or 17 depending on the effect you want. I usually leave it as 16 inches for medium and small size because I like the effect it gives the lower part, makes the skirt looks like a high waist skirt. So if you're a plus size, you can consider taking it up to 17 inches. So now to mark out the indication line, I'm going to be marking the armhole line at 8.5 inch, as you can see there. Then if you're a plus size, you may consider marking at 9 inches. Now the bust point measurement, I'm going to be marking at 10 inches. I usually go all the way to 11 inches for plus size, especially people with bust circumference of up to 46, 48 inches and above. So now I mark the under bust line at 13.5 inches. So if you want to know the formula I usually use without measuring clients of different bust sizes to determine their under bust line measurements, please check my description box below this video. Thank you. Now, as you can see, the half length line is still at 16 inches, and we'll go over to marking in the measurements. Now you're going to start off with measuring your nipple to nipple distance, divide it by 2, add 1 inch to it and mark. In my case, it's 8 inches divided by 2, 4, plus 1 inch, 5 inches. Now at the actual nipple line, you're going to divide your nipple to nipple measurement, which in my case I mentioned is 8 inches divided by 2, 4 inches. Then I'm going to take the 4 inches all through the line and I'm going to connect it to each other. Now we've created the dart line. To take in the dart from this point, I'm going to take 1.5 inch, and from the other side I'm taking ½ inch, and I'm going to repeat same at the under bust line. Then the next thing I'm going to do now is to connect it to each other. Now as you can see, while connecting it to each other, you make sure that you don't create any sharp point at the bust level. You come down by at least 1 inch below the bust nipple line to connect. Then you do the other side as well. So now I'm going to take 1 inch from both sides of the mark I made earlier on at the top and connect it to each other, as you can see. Next, I'm going to be marking the bust measurement at this point. Then I'm going to divide 38 inches into 4, which is 9.5 inch. Then I'm going to add 1 inch for joining the princess seam after cutting, which makes it 10.5. Then I'm going to go ahead and add 2 inches for side seam allowance. You can reduce this side seam allowance if you don't want too much seam allowance to yours. It's not standard. So here at the under bust area, as you can see, we still have 3.5 inches before the dart started. So I'm going to leave this 3.5 inches and put it over to the other leg of the dart. As you can see, 3.5 inches here. Now you're going to measure your under bust circumference divided by 4, which in my case is 7.5, plus 1 inch for joining the princess seam after cutting, which is 8.5 inches, plus I'm going to add my side seam allowance. Now I repeated the same at the half cut line. Now above here at the upper part of this piece, I'm going to further add 3 inches from this point right here towards the side seam area. I'm going to add 3 inches to that. So next, I'm going to connect the armhole line. Now the next thing to do now is to create the sweetheart neck, and I measured out 1.5 below the indication line, and I'm going to further mark out 1/2 inch away from the dart measurement like this. I'm taking in 1/2 inch from this point to this point, and I'm going to connect it to the neckline before cutting out. This will enable you, when you are joining the princess seam, both of them will align properly. If you don't take out the 1/2 inch before creating this, it may end up cutting off some allowances from it. So now that I've cut this off, I'm going to open this slit for the zip allowance, and when you're done, your front piece should look like this. Now for the back side, I divided the bust circumference of 38 into 4, which is 9.5, plus 2 inches for side seam allowance, then 2 inches also for the zip allowance, and with that measurement I folded up my fabric. Now as you can see, I marked out 2 inches first for the zip allowance right here, and at the upper part, also like the front, I marked out 1/2 inch before I placed the off shoulder measurement of 4 inch on top of it, and as you can see, the length is still 16 inches just like the front piece. Next, I'm going to start establishing the indication lines just as I have at the front. I have the armpit line 8.5 inches, and then half cut line, and then the underbust line as well. Now we're going to start off with marking in the bust measurement, which I'm using 38 inches divided by 4, 9.5 inch from this center back. You're going to mark it, then add your side seam allowance. So now at the half cut line and at the underbust area, I'm going to divide the waist circumference of 30 into 4, which is 7.5. Then I'm further going to add 1 inch to that for that allowance, and I'm going to mark it right there at the side seam area. Then I'm going to add my side seam allowance. Then measuring what we have here, which is 4 inches plus 3 inches we added at this point, is 7 inches, whereas we are going to use 1 inch for joining the seam after cutting, which makes it 6 inches. Now at this back area, I'm going to mark 7 inches instead of 6 inches we have in front, because the back width is often larger than that of the front. That is why I'm adding 1 inch to that. Then I'm going to connect my armhole area. So now after connecting this armhole area, we're going to mark in the dart line. Now to mark in your dart line is going to start from this armpit line right here, and you're going to measure 4 inches from the center back all through, and then make a straight line right there. Then you're going to take 1/2 inch from both sides of the dart line and mark it just as you would mark a basic bodice dart. So now that you have established this, the next thing I'm going to do is to measure down 1 inch from this indication line here to create a curve around the neckline area of the back piece. Now that I've marked this, the next thing I'm going to do is to connect it to this point. Now that you've connected this to this area, you're further going to cut out your pieces, and then we're going over to the lower part of the dress. Now to cut out the lower part of the dress, I placed my tape on 15 inches instead of 16 inches due to the fact that I want to create 1 inch for joining the upper and lower part of the dress together. So from there on, you determine the full length of your dress, and then I added 2 inches for hemming allowance. Now we're going to be cutting on fold, and to determine the amount of fabric to fold, I divided the hip circumference of 42 divided by 4, which is 10.5 plus 2 inches seam allowance. Now to mark in the indication line, I marked in the hip line at 25 inches. Then I marked in the knee line at 39 inches. This knee line measurement is not standard. You measure yourself or your client very well before you mark this knee line measurement. Then after this, the next thing I'm going to do now is to mark in the measurements of the skirt, starting with the waistline area. Right here from the folded edge, you're going to place your tape right there. Then I'm going to divide the waist circumference of 30 inches into 4, which is 7.5 inch. Then I'm further going to add 1 inch for that allowance, which is 8.5, and I'm going to mark it right there. Also add your side seam allowance. Now at the hip area, I'm going to divide 42 hip circumference into 4, which is 10.5, and I'm going to mark it at the side seam area with my side seam allowance. Now at the knee line, I'm going to remove 1.5 inch from the 10.5 I marked at the hip line, and I'm going to mark this at the knee line because I want my skirt, my dress to be well penciled at this area. Now at the full length line, I'm going to mark the same thing I marked at the knee line area right here. Then add my seam allowance, extended it to the hem line. Then I'm going to connect the side seam together. You must make sure you don't have any pointed edge right here, and then all the way up to the waistline. So now after marking in this, you're going to go ahead and cut out your front piece. Now to cut out the back piece, you're going to start off with folding out the fabric you're going to be needing. You're going to measure out the same amount of fabric you measured for the front piece. Then you're going to add 2 inches more to that for zip allowance and roll it out like this. Now from this point, you're going to place the front piece you cut out on the back piece like this, and you're going to cut out the side seam. Next, you're going to slash open the zip allowance for the back side. So next, I cut out the organza I used for decorating the neckline of the front bodice. This is the width I used, and this is the length of the organza I cut out, 2 inches. Now I'm going to show you how to join these pieces together. First of all, we're starting with the front bodice. We're going to join the princess seam right here with 1/2 inch from both sides of the pieces. You can do the same also to your lining pieces and set aside. Now we're going to be joining the zipper. From this point, you're going to join your zipper to both sides of the front bodice, sewing it like an exposed zipper without concealing the zipper entirely, like this. Next, I'm going to place the organza at the neckline area, right side to each other, and gather it from behind the zipper all through the neckline area, starting behind the zipper right here. I gathered it all through, leaving 1/2 inch out for joining the sleeves. Now, as you can see, at the edges right here, I folded in 1/2 inch at this point and also at this point to create a finished look. Then I placed my lining on top of it, right side to the fabric, sewed 3/4 of an inch at the zipper area, then 1/2 inch at the neckline area right here. Then I'm going to turn it over to the right side, but before then I'm going to notch these areas for easy relaxation after turning to the right side of the fabric. Now when you turn your fabric to the right side, you're going to sew the lining right now at the armpit area, side, lower part, all through these areas. And then before you cut out your excess zipper, you're going to run some stitches at the bottom part of the zipper to secure your zipper. Then this is what the front piece should look like, and you set it aside. Now for the lower part of the front side, I've cut out my lining piece and I've cut it all the way to the knee line plus 1 inch for hemming the lining. You can cut a full lining if you wish to, but this is the part I'm using for this. So here I've hemmed the lower part of my lining, and then the next thing I'm going to do now is to measure in the dart and sew on both the lining and the fabric. Now to measure in the dart for the front side, remember that we measured about 3.5 inch before the dart at the upper part area. Now to make the lower part of your dress to match to each other, you're going to measure from the center front 3.5 inch also, and then the length of my dart is about 9 inches. If you want your dart shorter, you can go ahead, but I prefer mine up to the hip line. So I'm going to take 1/2 inch from both sides of the dart and mark just as you would mark a basic bodice dart. Now next, I'm going to place my lining on the wrong side of my fabric, wrong side to each other, and I'm going to stitch starting from this point all the way to this point. And next, I'm going to join the lower and the upper part to each other by 1/2 inch along this point. Now over to the back piece. Now after sewing in the dart for the back piece, I chop off 1/2 inch from these areas to prevent frown lines at the zipper line. Now the next thing I did was to place my lining on my back piece right side to each other, and I'm going to use 1/2 inch and sew at the neckline area. Next, I'm going to notch these areas. Then I'm going to turn my lining over to the wrong side of my fabric, then stitch the lining onto the main fabric like this, and you're going to set this aside. Now to mark in the dart to match with what we did for the upper part of the back piece, we are equally going to measure in 4 inches from the center back area and then rule down like this. The length is equally 9 inches, just as I have for the front piece. I'm going to mark my dart like I marked the front piece, then stitch it on the main fabric and then also on the lining pieces. Now after making this dart, you're going to place your lining also just as the front piece, wrong side to wrong side of the skirt, and sew at this point also. You're going to do the same for both sides of the back piece. Now after that, you're going to join the upper part of the back piece together by placing it right side to each other, and you're going to stitch by 1/2 inch. Now I place the back pieces together right side to each other, and I want my zipper to stop 2 inches below the hip line right here. And remembered we measured 2 inches for the zip allowance, which is at this point here, 2 inches for the zipper allowance. So here is where I'm going to sew. I want my slit to be 4 inches above the knee line, so this is where I marked it. So this is my slit area, while I'm just going to stitch from this point right here up to this point right here. So I'm going to fix my zipper afterwards as well. Now after sewing, you should have something like this. Then the next thing I'm going to do now is to secure the slit area. You can make an overlapping slit, but I want to leave mine open. So what I'm going to do right now is to stitch 1/2 inch from this area up to 1/2 inch above where the slit actually started to the other side of the slit area, and then all the way down with the same 1/2 inch. After doing that, you should have something like this. As you can see, the stitches all the way to this point crossed over to the other side like this. So next, I'm going to join the back piece and front piece together by placing it right side to each other like this. I'm first of all going to mark out where I'm supposed to stitch depending on the seam allowance of the side seam, and I'm going to stitch my side seam and set aside. Now to create the sleeve for this dress, to fold out the fabric, you're going to measure your round sleeve, then double it, then add 1 inch for seam allowance. Then for the length of the sleeve I'm working with is 15 inches, but I added 2 inches above for casing of the elastic and 2 inches below also for the casing of the elastic. That means overall I have 19 inches length right here. So now after marking this out, the next thing we are going to do now is that I placed my tape right here and I measured out 5 inches right there. This is not standard, but I used it and I like it. Now at this point right here, instead of 5 inches to complete the off shoulder measurement, I'm going to mark 10 inches because I'll still put elastic right here. So I'm going to mark 10 inches right there. You may want to add 1/2 inch for seam allowance if you wish to, but I marked mine at exactly 10 inches. At this point, instead of marking in half of your round sleeve, I'm going to be doubling it. That is, instead of 6.5, I'm going to be marking at 13 inches because it's a puff sleeve, and I'm going to mark my seam allowance. Then I'm going to connect it from this point to this point. And note that before you connect this, you must make sure that whatever you measure from this point all the way to this point is the same as what you are going to have when you measure this point to the armpit level of your dress. So make sure it matches well with it before you cut out. So the next thing I'm going to do right now is to mark the lower part of the sleeve, which is to connect straight forward from this point to this point right here. So after doing that, this is what I have. You measure straight forward from this point to this point. Then I'm just going to cut this area out right here, and this is what I have. So I'm going to stitch the side seam together. Then I'm going to hem this lower part for the casing and the upper part as well for the casing of the elastic. Also note that while making the casing for the lower part of the sleeve, you're going to leave 1 inch open right here for passing the elastic. Now you're going to use a safety pin, put in your elastic, then you're going to pass it all around your round sleeve. Then after doing that, you have this, you're going to stitch it together, put it back in and secure your stitch. Then for the upper area also, you're going to pass your elastic. Then when you're satisfied with the stretch it gives, you're going to stitch the elastic onto the fabric to secure it to the fabric. And finally, you're going to sew in your sleeve to the armhole area of your dress, and your dress is ready. So guys, don't forget you can wear your dress as an off-shoulder dress like this, and also as a dress with shoulder like this. Let me know which one you prefer on the comment section below. I think I like both. So guys, if you are yet to subscribe to my channel, please subscribe and turn on your notification bell for more interesting videos. And if you've enjoyed this tutorial so far, please don't forget to give it a big thumbs up. And if you have any question, drop it on the comment section below. See you guys in my next. Bye.